Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Trade Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and we are joined today by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you doing, sir?
How's it, Nick? How's it going?
Very good, thank you. And of course, we're also joined by Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you this fine autumn day?
Delicious.
Excellent. Well, let us get started with our first story, and this one absolutely delighted me when I read it, just because it's so sort of South African government. Now, we did a story a while ago about how the city of Johannesburg has in its integrated development plan this idea that it's going to build some kind of monumental structure to attract tourism. Well, it seems that the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture does not want to be left out of the mix and is planning its own monumental project, except in this case, it's a flag. But not just any flag, a flag that is up 100-meter tall flagpole, and presumably the flag will, be absolutely massive itself. So that's pretty cool, conceptualize. Anyway, the department says that it has conducted a feasibility study on the development of the South African monumental flag, and this was undertaken in 2020, 2021. The results of the feasibility study will inform the brief for the South African national monumental flag. 5 million rand is budgeted in 2022 and 2023 for site-specific geotechnical studies, including environmental impact assessment and other tests and applications that will be required prior to construction. And then in 2023 to 2024, 17 million rand has been allocated for the installation of the monumental flag. The Department of Arts and Culture believes that this will contribute towards a nation building and social cohesion, and they believe that the operational plan and the feasibility study that they've conducted will guide the way towards installing the monumental flag. And so this is the great idea of the Department of Arts and Culture to create a truly South African landmark, which will surely bring thousands of tourists from across the world and unite South Africans in patriotic pride behind our awesome giant flag. Well, on one hand, I kind of like the idea of a giant flag. On the other hand, Gabriel, 22 million rand seems like quite a lot for a flag.
Right. I mean, I am not in construction, but 5 million rand to do an environmental impact assessment and other tests for the flag strikes me as pretty exorbitant. I mean, I know that when the government procures a broomstick or a mop, it sometimes has to spend 136,000 rand casually. I know that when the government buys toilet paper, it does so often at a factor of 15 times more than you can buy a single roll at the local spaza shop or grocery store. So I know that when the South African government buys things, you have to expect it to spend more than anyone else would spend on the same thing. I get that. I totally get that. But when the thing you're trying to figure out is what a flagpole and flag are going to do to the environment, sort of what sort of impact they're going to have on the weather and the migration patterns of birds and the local wildlife in terms of flora and fauna, I think 5 million rand might be a new record for the most over budgeted amount to be openly advertised in a South African government tender. I think it sets a record, and every day that flag is up in the sky, we will be able to marvel at the amount of wastage that our administration can pull off. And that's all within the caveat that if it could be done in a cost-effective way, nicely and cheaply and stylishly, I would be the first person to tackle all the naysayers that would still remain. I mean, there are 10% of libertarians, or, I mean, that's flattering. There's like 1% of the country that really just thinks the government shouldn't exist at all, even if it was really good. It doesn't matter, good, bad, just anarchists who really would prefer to have no flag. And I'd be happy to verbally assuage them of the importance of national symbols, etc., etc. But that's only if it's done in a proper, cost-effective way.
So, Marius, it's another one of these kind of wacky stories that seems to be coming out of a government that really doesn't have any ideas of how to do anything sort of serious. I agree with Gabriel completely. We actually have an awesome flag, and were our cultural and tourism sectors, sitting here ready for a liftoff, I'd say, yeah, let's go for it. I mean, it's probably not necessary, but 22 million in the grand scheme of government budget, or let's say it was much cheaper. Let's say, I don't know, 15, 10 million rand, whatever, is much, it's not huge amount in terms of government budget. Maybe it'll attract some tourists. I don't know. The flag is cool. But this really doesn't seem like the right time. Marius, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And, I think it's kind of something we've been seeing that's coming out of this government. It can't actually run anything properly. There's the old joke, can't even run a bath. And that's why it comes up with these kinds of things, these silly, it's going to build a flag pole for 200 million rand. And then we've also seen it, for example, with the COVID regulations. We had these COVID regulations that really don't make any sense anymore. The mask mandate, we still have a mask mandate. We're probably one of the only countries in the world that still actually has a mask mandate. Because I think it's, the government trying to show, look, we are actually doing something. And when, instead of actually doing the hard work, they want to do these easy things, make people wear masks, build a flagpole. I saw there's a story yesterday that Natim Tetwa said, must accelerate the changing of place names in South Africa, which is all well and good, fine, whatever. But how's that going to stop people using pit toilets in schools in the Eastern Cape? Or, there's a recent story came out now about malnutrition levels among South African children. And, they're extraordinarily high, especially for a country like what we are, which is still a middle income country. And we, kind of just tinkering on the edges, not doing anything. And just, you just shake your head, and it just, you realize that we don't have a serious government, and I don't think we're taken particularly seriously abroad. Maybe if we really want to get tourists to come to South Africa with kind of national pride thing, maybe we should do like a Mount Rushmore thing on Table Mountain or something. Maybe we get Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki. Maybe even put old Helen Ziller there to make the young people happy, something like that. Every night as you come into Cape Town Harbour, you see these nice faces carved onto the side of Table Mountain.
Marius,
that would actually attract people.
Marius, you're going to give them terrible ideas. Please stop.
Have you seen the sculpture of Nelson Mandela in Sandton Square? It's probably like the biggest tourist attraction in terms of the thing that people take photographs in front of. And it is singularly the ugliest, most inept, clumsy sculpture made by humankind.
There's the V&A Waterfront one of the 4 Peace Prize laureates. Desmond Tutu, Albert Lutuli, and de Klerk Mandela. Those are also hideous, but maybe they can use those as a template. I don't know.
Bad, not as bad. If they start carving into the side of the mountain, it's going to be the worst. We will just create the worst sculpture in the world. What country is it? Is Senegal has the largest sculpture anywhere? But at least they got the North Koreans. They got the North Koreans to make it. And also, it's a large woman with 2 breasts that are pointing in completely opposite directions. There is such a thing as a style and aesthetics, and you don't, which is, I've got to say, the one good thing about this project is that because it's the flag, the design is already sorted, right? That's why they've got the 5 million rand budget. You can't mess it up. So that's
actually, you know what? No, hold on. Let's not say that, because you could maybe print it on bad material. One more thing is, of course, that the Americans have, as you pointed out, Marius, Mount Rushmore, which is this huge. It's surprisingly divisive, actually, in some sort of intellectual circles in America, as to not just for sort of anti-American woke reasons, but also because it's sort of this weird kind of deification of some presidents who maybe shouldn't even be heralded up there. But crucially, it is in the middle of nowhere. It's in, I think, South Dakota or something. A state which normally has no other reason to visit. So this is If we're going to build, a giant, ugly Mount Rushmore version South African statue, we should definitely build
You put it
I
in
don't know,
Benoni. You put it in
yeah,
Benoni.
in Benoni or the
Where
Northern
no one's
Cape.
going.
Exactly, some desolate wasteland,
Switched here. This is coming from Joburg, hashtag just saying.
But Gabriel, as a sort of final thought, the last thing that amuses me about this story is that it's a 4-year project. So it took a year to do the feasibility study. I actually want to read that feasibility study.
A year to do the pre-plan, yeah.
Yeah, to do the feasibility study, which is separate from the impact assessment and the what is it they call the geotechnical study?
Yes. Geotechnical. My goodness, it really is it is like children in a sandpit, pushing around little blocks and calling it a country. I think it's kind of tragic because we really have one of the world's most dynamic and interesting art scenes. I reflect on the Apartheid Museum, which just really is one of the most excellent spaces for the concentration and conservation of cultural and history in the world.
Yeah, it's a really nice museum.
I think about the Voortrekker Monument, which stands, was erected for including, Italian fascist values, but it copied some of the Italian fascist style rather well. The marbling, the dome, the shining through of the light, the engineering that goes behind making sure that only lands on the plinth at a specific on the commemoration moment of Blood River. There are real icons that aren't just Table Mountain, which is a natural facet. But our parliament burnt down. That was one of the oldest and most storied buildings, cultural bits of heritage in this country. The Johannesburg Art Gallery, which is the largest, has the largest collection of artworks in Africa, over 1 million pieces, including Gerard Sokoto's, Pablo Picasso's, Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol, by the way, just broke the record for the largest sale of an artist by an American artist at auction. I saw Andy Warhol's in the Johannesburg Art Gallery on the floor that had been dragged away from flooded parts of the building. Where those artworks are right now, worth hundreds of millions of rand, I'm not sure. Presumably overseas, being safely kept. So we've got international heritage. We've got very amazing domestic heritage. Our art scene punches hugely above its weight. The design, including in terms of architecture capacity that we have in this country, is extraordinary. And if the government was smart about it, it would harness that energy to increase tourism and to increase social cohesion amongst a difficult population. Instead, it's a bloody joke.
No, exactly. And that's I think exactly the point here. This is the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. So the things you talked about are precisely the things that they should be spending money on, instead of coming up with some new overpriced boondoggle that's just probably going to end up being embarrassing in some way because it'll run 3 years over deadline. Or I don't know, maybe it'll be unveiled just in time for the fall of the ANC government. Wouldn't that be lovely? But okay, let's go on to our next story. And this is actually also related to the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. And this is the ongoing trauma and crisis and internal squabbling around Cricket South Africa. Well, about 3 months ago, we did an episode, I think it was called Mark Boucher on Trial. And there was these allegations that Mark Boucher had been racist towards people on the South African cricket side, or the coaching staff and such. And now Mark Boucher was going to be dragged before a disciplinary committee, and they were going to determine whether he was guilty or not. Well, Cricket South Africa has dropped all of the charges against Mark Boucher after allegedly some of the key witnesses said that they were not going to testify. The organization's CEO has said they regret the strain the matter has put on Boucher. The board chairperson, Lawson Naidu, said, that Cricket SA has been at all times committed to dealing with the social justice, nation-building issues and manners that treats them with the utmost seriousness and also ensures fairness, due process, and finality. The social justice and nation-building process was never only or even mainly about the conduct of individuals. More fundamentally, it was about providing a platform for persons involved in cricket to share their personal experiences of racial and gender discrimination and allow for careful consideration of systemic measures necessary to readdress these issues going forward for the future. Marius, you follow cricket very closely. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. This comes also after charges against Graham Smith were dropped, where he was also accused of being racist and so on. 2 independent advocates found that all the charges against Graham Smith were nonsense, and CSA also had to pay Graham Smith's legal fees, I believe. But there's also another problem here, is in that there are probably a lot of these issues and grievances that have been raised probably do. I mean, they have that come from reality. I'm sure Paul Adams did sometimes feel excluded in the team. He was the guy that Mark Boucher called a brown shit, and which upsets him. And, probably at the time, this was the late 90s, there probably was an issue of, it was probably quite a macho culture from, from a white South African culture, and people who are from different races and cultures probably didn't feel too welcome and so on. But, this also happened 20 years ago. And I think Mark Boucher has apologized to Paul Adams. He apologized to him in a statement. I'm sure he apologized to him privately. So, there's all these... So I think now a lot of people will look at this, what happened with Mark Boucher and Graham Smith, and ignore all the other things, which there are possibly issues, and in a country like South Africa, especially with cricket, which does have a kind of culture around it, there probably are happy people who've felt excluded and so on. If you look at the current team, I do think they're doing a better job on that kind of thing than was happening 20 years ago. It's it's much more mixed team. It doesn't seem that there are these kinds of issues. I think the Springboks have been done very well with it, with people of different cultures working together well. We're the world champions in rugby at the moment. But overall, just shows you what a mess there is at CSA. This thing has been handled completely, extremely poorly. It's dragged the names of 2 South African cricket legends, Graham Smith and Mark Boucher, through the mud. Graham Smith has left his position as director of cricket, and he's going to go commentate in the IPL now at the moment. But apparently, CSA, they've just launched a new T20 competition that will be played in January every year. Apparently, they're looking to Graham Smith to either be in charge of it or be second in charge. So, they've treated Graham Smith completely, they've treated him abhorrently. They also made all kinds of claims about Graham Smith, that he refused to report to a black CEO, even though he was happy to report to a majority black board, and made all these kinds of claims about him, and also about Mark Boucher. So it just shows you what kind of organization CSA is. And I just hope that they can start waking up and actually start running the game properly. Even though the protests are doing pretty well at the moment, there's some serious issues around domestic cricket. Money's running out to actually keep the game going in South Africa. So there's lots of issues that actually need to be concentrated on. And this whole, whatever you want to call it, brouhaha cost CSA literally millions of rands, which could have gone to, development or marketing of the game or whatever, all kinds of things. The money that could have been used much better than, going attacking 2 people who have done, have given their lives to South African cricket, and, Graham Smith and Mark Boucher. And it's actually a disgrace the way they were treated.
So, Gabriel, the kind of cliche in South Africa is that our sports teams are sort of these things that unite us. And at least in the middle class, and I'm sure across most of the country, people do get a little bit of a good feeling in their hearts and souls when our sports teams do well. And so when you have a great fight like this, with allegations of racism thrown around, I can't imagine it's too good for race relations in the country, or sort of, general social cohesion. Gabriel, what do you make of this? You've been very concerned over the years about people making allegations of racism and then not kind of following it through properly or bringing the evidence. So what do you make of the whole saga here?
Yeah, I think that there is something to be said for exonerating people who have been falsely accused of being racist. That hasn't really happened in this case. Rather, so in Graham Smith's case, which we reported on a couple of weeks ago, they said, look, here's what we're finding. We're finding no evidence of racism. The allegations are debunked. This is more like, well, somehow the allegations have been withdrawn, and that means there's no longer any sustainable evidence. And you have people like Marius saying that probably they were racist because there was a white culture or whatever it was that he said.
I don't think I said that.
So, well, it's on video.
Where did I say that they were racist? Did I say Grant Smith and Mark Boucher are racist? Is that what I said?
You described what Mark Boucher is accused of having said to Paul Adams, and said that probably, not them in particular, but probably in that context, there was some racism going on because it was a majority white team. Now, I think that we do sit in this uncomfortable space where some people, I mean, even Nicholas, your reading out of the sort of dismissal of the charges against Mark Boucher said, well, here's the thing. Our commission wasn't supposed to be about finding individuals guilty. It was rather supposed to be about finding whether there's a general or systemic problem in play here. And that's one of the things that really concerns me. There's a sort of old-fashioned idea that racism is something that individuals do to other individuals. That's much easier if the individual involved is part of a dominant group and has racist laws to back them up. In fact, one of the ways that individuals do things to other individuals that are racist is by passing laws and enforcing laws that are racist. So it's not to say that this old-fashioned idea of racism is completely separated from group dynamics, but it is to say, on the old-fashioned view, if you're going to go investigating racism and you're going to find racism, then you should come out saying, he was the racist, this is the racist thing that he did. The systemic view of racism is much more like, well, I can tell that there's racism around. I can't say who in particular is racist. I can't say in particular what racist thing happened. But just by looking at the demographics, I see that, you know, this particular group doesn't match the national demographics. And so I've got a very strong inference to draw that there's something racist going on there. And then the solution, if that's your idea of racism, demographic representativity, the solution is always going to be something like quotas. And I think insofar as South African sports have started to fail to do the job that they were once so successful at doing, namely uniting South Africa around the flag, around the idea of a shared national identity, it has been because of both an overt and covert kind of quotarization of the team. And the South African rugby team is a very good example, where when Siya Kolisi was made captain, the first thing that he said was to a media presser, guys, please don't treat me like a black captain. If I don't do the right thing, the coach must fire me. I've got to be the best leader for the team. That's got to be what this is. This has got to be about merit. And our polling shows at least 80% of South Africans agree with that, including 80% of black South Africans, that national team representatives have to be South Africans and they have to be excellent. They don't have to be of any particular race. But when the South African rugby team won the World Cup, immediately the first thing that the commentator said was, well, now that we've got a black captain, this is a victory that young black children can look up to and consider to be their own. I think that's rubbish. I think that when we won in 2007, South Africans of all colors welcomed that victory and celebrated it. I think when we won in 1995 with a 98% white team, South Africans of all colors celebrated that victory. So the sort of demographic argument seems to me to be one made by people in comfortable positions who have theories about race that are disconnected from reality, but which unfortunately have a great prominence and so get played over and over again, and so become more and more what people expect. And you know, that eventually changes minds. And I think that is sort of what we're seeing the tail end of at Cricket South Africa. Cricket South Africa, when I watch the IPL, the professional league in India, it's like just players. There's black players, white players, Indian players, but it's just players. It's good players, bad players. If guys are on form, they get rewarded. If they're off form, they get dropped. In South African cricket, the whole world, the whole conversation has devolved into this, at least the little bits of it that I engage with, into this bean counting game of like, how mixed is the team now? That's got to be a sign of something good or something bad, rather than how are they performing and what do we read into that?
Marius, any final thoughts before we move on?
Nah, Gabriel's run the whole show as usual.
All right. So let us move on to our next story, and this is about the Philippines. And this is a country I think that none of us are super keen on in terms of like our knowledge, but it's a country that's surprisingly, I think, influential in the next decade or so. And this is because it has, firstly, a really big population. It also sits right in the sort of disputed zone of the Asia Pacific region, right? And this is where we're seeing a lot of geopolitical friction between China and America, between Australia and China, and generally that a lot of shifting pieces, military posturing, that kind of stuff. Well, the Philippines has just had an election, and for president, they have elected the son of former dictator Fernando Marcos, who ran the country, I think, in the 80s and was eventually forced out by a sort of mass revolt. His son is called also Ferdinand Marcos, but goes by the name Bongbong in public, which is an interesting nickname.
Sounds very serious and professional.
Yes, no, it's sort of, I just can't really imagine presenting President Bongbong. It sounds very strange. Anyway, so President Bongbong here, he's not officially been declared president yet, but it looks pretty clear from the early results and the unofficial tally that he's won an overwhelming majority. Now, I saw him described in the foreign media as the Filipino Trump, which is very kind of lazy because they described his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, as the Filipino Trump as well. But in a lot of ways, he has at least run as a sort of continuity candidate with Duterte. Duterte was, of course, famous for, some say, essentially encouraging vigilante violence and extreme cruelty towards people accused of either being drug addicts or selling drugs in the Philippines. So I don't know. It's an interesting question, Marius. How do you think this? Also, one of the other things is that he's noted for probably being soft on China, both Rodrigo Duterte and now Bongbong. Marius, what do you make of this? Do you think China's going to be happy with this? Do you think the Philippines is going to continue on in the way it is?
Well, it seems another victory for populists. It seems like a kind of a populist character, but I think there's some, as we were talking before the show, he seems to be not exactly a guy who's very above board, and but he's obviously won this election pretty easily if you look at the results. So there seems to be a trend around the world, in parts of the world, where even people who come from, his dad was ran the place on the ground. His mom was known for having millions of pairs of shoes, and he's still that doesn't taint him at all. Somehow he's still coming out as a candidate, and now he's obviously won. So maybe this could maybe something the Zoomers could look at. Maybe we're going to be seeing Zoomers candidates in 2024.
It's not a joke what Marius is saying. If you go and look at this guy's Wikipedia page, for example, it is nothing but stories about his legal battles and his corruption scandals. It's incredible. I've never read a politician where it's just corruption all the way down. Also, his political platform seems kind of sort of actually quite centrist, which is quite interesting. And I get the feeling that a lot of the reason that some people overseas are concerned about his election is actually precisely because of his sort of rhetorical tone. Gabriel, in sort of 60 seconds or so, what's your takeaway from this?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting clash. Marius calls him populist. You say he seems like a centrist. I'm not really sure what to make of it. I do think that it's worth considering things within context, which means looking at, how he was running compared to how the opposition was running, both those that did well, relatively speaking, and those that didn't. And, where things are going to go forward, I think is hard to say. It strikes me that the Philippines is a country of enormous size in terms of population and of almost minuscule imprint in terms of the common knowledge that people around the world have about it. It somehow seems to fly under the radar. And I think that that is partly because of those factors you were alluding to. The complexity of its historic and cultural heritage, partly Asian Pacific, it's got Spanish vibes, it's got strong American vibes, being pulled into Beijing's orbit. It doesn't really, it seems like its people don't really know politically who they are yet. And in the absence of some strong sense of identity, are attracted to a familiar face. I think that is the comfort that's being expressed, but I'm not sure because it might be that to a certain extent, I'm just the one who doesn't really know what to make of their identity.
No, indeed. Anyway, that's all the time we have for this show. So thank you very much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed the show, and we will be back tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.